Hello, welcome to Tim Conley Drums. Quick update, my hand is feeling a lot better. I got the okay from the surgeon 2 days ago that I can start playing with a band again in December or January. So I'm really stoked about being able to get back out playing. Now, I'm currently not in a band. I was in a band, but because of my hand situation, the members of that band decided to move on to other things because we weren't working. I wasn't able to play. I get it. You know, I was a little bit upset at first, but I get it. If those guys are watching, you know, I wish you guys good luck. They're really good guys. The guys that were in the band, the 90s tribute that I was in, great guys. I love those guys, but I understand the fact that they want to play and they want to be in bands that are working, and our band was unable to work because of my hand situation. But now, December, January, I'm going to be back on the circuit, so I'm going to be looking for either a tribute band, a wedding band, corporate band. I'm not really interested in any touring, and I would prefer to stay somewhat local. I mean, short tours, less than 2 weeks, I'm okay with. But I don't want to do any extended touring. So today's video, we are going to talk about the touring. Now, I've done quite a bit of touring. I've been in rags, and I've been in not necessarily riches, but decent conditions touring. So in the beginning, my first few tours was basically Northern Ontario, some parts of Southern Ontario, but it was mainly in Ontario, in a van with 4 other guys. So there was 5 of us. It was a 4-piece band plus a sound guy. We had to have a sound guy. So we were in a van and we had a U-Haul trailer in the back hauling all our gear. There was no crew because we just couldn't afford it. You have to remember, guys, if any of you, and I want you please comment, let me know if you're familiar with the Northern Ontario tour, you know, Timmins and North Bay and various small towns that I can't even remember all along the way. The tour is more driving than it is playing. And it's tree after tree after tree. I love nature, but it's literally just forest like crazy up there. And it's beautiful, but the drive is so long in between venues, it's unbelievable. Now, the thing about that tour is it glamorous? That everybody thinks that, you know, the touring is glamorous. Well, those tours in Northern Ontario was anything but glamorous. Now, I was young. I was excited to be out on my first tours, but it was not easy because it wasn't like a bar gig where you're making $400, $500, $600, whatever it is. These venues that I was playing were actually ticketed venues, but they were bars. But you had to buy a ticket at the door, and we had to split it with potentially other bands or the venue. Well, always the venue and potentially other bands, because sometimes it was just us playing. Other times there might have been it was a venue where there was 3 or 4 bands and we were one of the bands. And of course, somebody buys a $10 ticket at the door and we are splitting that with all the other bands and the venue. So some nights we would walk away with a few $100 in our pocket, and other nights we would walk away with virtually nothing in our pocket. Now, the thing is, guys, we were playing original music and covers. And we would try to get in with other bands that were more well-known, and we were the opening acts because at that time, back in the 80s, we were a completely unknown band. And if you think that you can tour being an unknown band and be successful, get that thought out of your head right now. If you're playing exclusively original music and nobody's ever heard of you, the fact that you get a gig is a miracle in itself. But if you think that people are going to show up at a venue and they've never heard of you, forget that. It is just not going to happen. Absolutely not going to happen. So you have to jump on a bandwagon with other bands when you're virtually an unknown band, and you just got to hope that people show up to see the more well-known bands, and they're going to see you because you're one of the opening bands. So that's basically what we did back in the early days. We jumped on the bandwagon with some other bands that were a little bit more well-known, and we would open up for them. So the thing is you got 5 guys, 4 bandmates and a sound guy living in a van, basically. You're basically living in a van, but you're not down by the river, you're constantly moving. And the 5 of you share the driving. And of course, no GPS back in the 80s, it's all maps. So 4 young guys, very young guys, the sound guy was a young guy too, out to conquer the unknown of Northern Ontario, performing music, and nobody's heard of us. Seems like a bit of a nightmare, and in some ways it was. The van breaks down occasionally, we had a flat tire, almost hit a deer, that was really scary. Didn't happen, but almost, that was terrifying. Some of the venues, basically nobody showed up. And then we had gigs where a lot of people showed up, but they weren't there to see us, so it was kind of like, you know, they weren't really interested in us. We got up there and we did our thing, but being unknown at the time, of course, not much response from the audience, and that's what you have to expect. So if you're gonna go out on the road, you're 19, you're 20, you're 21 years old, you're on the road, and you're in a band nobody's ever heard of, be prepared for 0 audience response. Guys, it is the reality of the touring musician. It's not all the glamour. Now, when you're in a situation where you're living with 4 other guys like I was, in a van, going from place to place to place, you're gonna have fights. You're not always gonna get along. The thing is, the smell. Now, you guys that have done this touring are gonna laugh. I know you're starting to laugh, because 5 guys in a van, it can smell bad. And you need a shower, dude. Oh, I had a shower. You stink, you smell bad. That's just my shoes, you know. And then I can remember arguing in the van. We're actually driving, arguing in the van. Bass player's shoes smell bad. What does the guitar player do? Roll the window down. The guy's taking his shoes off, and that's where the smell is coming from, is the shoes and his feet, but the shoes are the real culprit. Guitar player tosses the shoes out the window as we're driving at 2 o'clock in the morning. This is the only pair of shoes apparently this guy has brought on the tour. Really stupid to only bring 1 pair of shoes, and the guitar player tosses them out the window. This leads to practically a full-on punch-up in a moving vehicle. Extremely dangerous. So I'm laughing, but at the time it's like, holy shit, what is happening right now? We're in a moving vehicle and everyone's fighting. So the driver, who happened to be the sound guy at the time, pulls over, and these guys are duking it out. Myself and the singer are trying to break it up, and they go out and they end up, we had flashlights, no phones at the time, remember, no GPS, everything is being done by a map. And anyways, we get out, we hunt the shoes down, we get the shoes, but they did smell really bad. We didn't have any spray or anything. I remember, I think the bass player ended up spraying his shoes with some spray deodorant. That's what he did. Yes, he got some spray deodorant, sprayed his shoes to try to relieve the smell. So that's one of the issues, is 5 stinky guys in a van. Everybody has to clean themselves up at the venue if possible. Now, of course, not every bar has a shower. Actually, barely any bars have a shower. We're not in a hotel. We're going from the venue, which is a bar, to the vehicle. Right after the show, we're all sweaty. The smell can be atrocious. It's horrible. Sometimes we would stop maybe a mile or 2 down the road, get into a gas station, and just try and scrub ourselves down in a bathroom. It was very colonial style living, let me tell you. And you're a nomad. I mean, you're driving from place to place to place. At no time in those early day tours did we stop and stay at a hotel. So just put yourself in this position. You're virtually living in a van. Occasionally, of course, you're stopping at places to get cleaned up, but you're going from venue to van and drive to the next place. So you're living in a small little van. Tempers flare, things smell bad. You know, you're eating in that van. Sometimes we would stop and get out and go in a restaurant and eat in a restaurant, but it had to be cheap, man. That's the other thing. When you're on those low-end tours, you're not eating well. The worst possible thing you can do is start getting into booze and drugs. So I want to talk about that next. I was very fortunate that we were young guys on tour, but we weren't stupid or crazy. The guys that I was actually playing with were actually pretty level-headed guys. And there was not, I mean, you know, we would have the odd beer or whatever, you know, at the gig, but only if they were free. We couldn't afford to buy alcohol at the time. And even to this day, what is it, like $6 for a beer, $7 for a beer now in a Toronto bar? So who the hell wants to dig into your pay for the night paying that much money for a beer? That's way too much. Now, back in those days, I don't remember how much the beer was. Let's say it was $1.50, $2, I don't know. But that still cut into the money that we were earning. And we wanted to eat. I remember talking to the guys saying, look, it's nice to have a drink, I get it, but we gotta eat. Food is more important than having a drink. Now, I never partook in any drugs. I've never been a dope smoker. Occasionally the guys would partake. We never actually bought it that I'm aware of. They would partake with outside after the gig, you know, the chef at the restaurant or at the venue, a bartender, a patron, somebody that liked the band, they would spark one up and the guys would participate a little bit. I personally never did, it's just not my thing. As far as drinks go, if the venue gave us free drinks, which was very rare because most places they don't encourage the band to drink for free, but sometimes people in the audience would buy us a beer. So that's when we would usually have a beer. I think I might have bought maybe one or two in the entire Northern Ontario tour scene, maybe one or two, just because I just didn't want to cut into my money, plain and simple. I preferred to eat and whatever. Now, the thing is we brought all our clothes. We didn't buy much stuff along the way except for gas, food, water, and absolute necessities like batteries for some of the gear that required batteries, like, you know, batteries for the guitar players' effects modules. Sometimes we would have to spend money on that, you know, so we had to keep the tour going. Now, most of those young kids out there touring like I did back in the 80s and somewhat into the 90s, we were losing money. Let's be honest, we're losing money because we spent so much money on gas. That was the killer. And gas prices weren't even ridiculous. I couldn't imagine being 20 years old now with gas prices the way they are and doing that tour. You would not make a dime. You would lose money. You know, you're just doing it for the love at that point because you're completely losing money. Okay, now let's get to a little bit better tour. If you are lucky enough to get yourself on a tour where you're either going to be staying at a hotel occasionally, like let's say you're playing a gig and the venue actually is associated with a hotel, the venue is a hotel, or the venue will put you up down the road. If you get a gig like that, so let's say you get a 3-nighter, let's say somewhere, like for example, casinos. Casinos will almost always put you up if you're from out of town. Not always, don't quote me on that, but if you're from out of town and you're a touring act, the casino is going to put you up and they're going to pay for it. You might get a breakfast out of the deal too, or you're going to have to rely on the management for the touring or the promoter or the label. If you're associated with a label, something like that, they're going to have to pay someone to feed you. Now, sometimes it's catered. Sometimes it's literally just somebody running down to Subway. It all depends. It's certainly not, 5-star dining when you are on tour, unless you're playing with somebody who's, Taylor Swift or something. You're going to eat well on that tour. But if you're on a tour with a band that's not really, super famous or anything, you're sort of known, you're going to be eating, hamburgers and fries. It's just the way it is. So bring your vitamins and maybe bring a blender and some protein powder or smoothies or whatever so you can eat a little bit better when you're out on tour. So, in the 90s, 2000s, I did a few tours where I was playing with people that had a little bit more money, and I was on a bus. And like I said, you would stay at a hotel. If the tour was playing a 3-nighter, a 4-nighter, a 5-nighter, like I remember, because some of the casinos were 5-nighters, and you wouldn't be on the bus, you would just stay at the hotel. Now, if you're in a situation where you're literally going from town to town to town, city to city, and you're on a bus, I've done those gigs. I was not on any kind of a luxury bus, let me tell you guys. Yes, I had a bunk to sleep in. We had an eating area, but the bus was a regular bus that had just been converted into a tour bus. It was not a fancy bus. It was not glamour. It's not like, a big name band that Journey, for example, say Journey or Styx or somebody is out on tour. They got a nice bus because they can afford it, and they can afford fancy, TVs and good food and a good sleeping area, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But for most of us that are doing lower level to mid-range touring, which is pretty much what I did, you're not living in luxury by any means. It's better than the van and 5 stinky guys being on that bus because you get an actual area to sleep. You get an actual bed in the bus to sleep in, which is, I'm telling you right now, guys, getting your own bed on tour is priceless. The worst thing is sharing with another guy on tour, and again, you guys that have toured, you know why I'm shaking my head. Oh man, I've been in touring situations where I had to share a bed with somebody, and that was a freaking nightmare. That was a nightmare. You can't sleep because they're snoring, they're moving, they sleep weird, whatever. And plus you're just not used to sleeping with a guy beside you. It's kind of weird, right? So when I got on tour and I was able to be in my own bed, oh my God, what a joy that was. Like I said, the bus was nothing special, broke down a few times, whatever. But the joy of the whole touring, the reason that we suck it up and we're in a crappy bus, and a couple of tours I was on actually had bus drivers. So we had the crew, which would be a sound guy, a light guy, management, maybe a manager's secretary, and of course the band and all the people involved with the band that carry the gear. So if you're lucky enough to be in a situation where you got roadies and or a setup crew, that's the dream, because there's nothing worse than having to haul all your gear out of this bus, set it all up yourself, do your sound check, play the show, then after the show, tear everything down, load it up onto the bus. It's a hell of a lot of work. Been there, done that. So guys, if you're in a touring situation where you've actually got a crew that do that for you, treat that crew and your tech. If you have a guitar tech or a drum tech on the gig, treat those people like gold. because they are worth their weight in gold. I'm telling you, it's such an incredible luxury to have those people. I've only had that situation happen a couple of times where I was touring, but man, oh man, I worship those guys, and I always treated them really, really well because they can make or break your show. Plus, they're lugging around all your gear and you don't have to do it. Now, like I said, if you're a big star, you know, if you're in a big name band, you're Def Leppard, you're in Journey, you're in Foreigner, whatever, you're in a big name band, you're touring, of course you're gonna have a tech, you're gonna have a crew, they do all the work, and hopefully those guys treat them well. I know from talking to Todd Zuckerman and watching a recent documentary about Styx, Todd treats the crew like gold. So kudos to Todd Zuckerman, he's a great guy. And please check out my video where I'm teaching you about flagpole snap, which Todd taught me. Anyways, back to the touring. So you've got incredible ups and downs with the touring as well. Sometimes you're dealing with situations where you might be in a town where people want to meet you. So you're going to have to do meet and greets potentially, which I actually enjoyed doing that. It's always fun to meet the fans and whatever. Now guys, I'm not naming, I know you're gonna ask, what bands did you play with? I'm not really into the whole naming of the bands thing. I have toured with some name people, but not huge names, So don't think that you're gonna hear me say, yeah man, I've toured with Bon Jovi or whatever. Nothing like that. Now my friend Phil, Phil Xopoulos, the man, I played some gigs with him in Toronto. He is touring, or was touring, with Bon Jovi. After Richie Sambora got fired, Phil got the gig, man. Really, really lucky dude to get that gig. That's a good gig, getting the Bon Jovi gig. And you're traveling in the lap of luxury with a band like that because of the amount of money that those guys can haul in. I got a few other friends that play in big name bands, and they've been treated very, very well. Now, most of the time when I was touring, I was a sideman. Now, here's the thing about being a sideman that I really, really want to emphasize. You are not going to get rich being a sideman. You might make $300 to $500 a night, depending on the artist. 3 being actually, in Canada, particularly on the high end. I can remember doing tours with, you know, not big stars or anything like that, but someone that had some songs out and was doing reasonably well, and I was making $150 a night. Just the way it is. You have to be aware that you're not going to be a millionaire as a sideman. The artist, if there's money to be made, the artist is making way more money than you do. Plus, you got to remember the artist has to pay everybody if it's if there's a crew involved and stuff. So you could say, well, I don't want the crew so I can make more money, but don't, because that crew is so valuable. You're so tired after driving around in this bus, then you play a show and you set up your gear and you tear down your gear, man, you will get so tired of that after a short period of time. So if you're not making a ton of money, $150, $200, unfortunately, you got to suck that up because you're just not going to make a lot of money. Now, like I said, if you're in a bigger name act, 300 to 500 is the standard. Even if you're in a big name act, that's what you're going to make. Everybody thinks that, you're the guitar player, you're the hired guitar player in a huge band, that you're going to be a millionaire. It does not work that way. It does not work that way. Unless you're in a situation like, let's say, Metallica, where other than the bass player, everybody's a founding member, everybody splits the money equally. If you're a hired guy, so you got hired to play in the band, you're not going to be making that much money. Now, there are exceptions. I know that Bon Jovi pays Phil really well. He pays him way more than $300 a show. Plus, if you're not playing, you're usually put on a per diem. So even if you're not playing, you're still making some money. you use that per diem to, you know, get your food and whatever you need on the way during the tour. That's usually how that per diem thing works. And if if you get put on salary, like Bon Jovi puts his people on salary, well, then you're making money consistently, tour or not touring. So he treats his people pretty good. Most times when you're out on tour, though, you are not going to get paid when you're not playing. You're making $300 to $500 a show. So guys, that is the reality of touring. And like I said, I've done the low end and I've done the middle. I have never done the absolute luxury tour, and I probably never will now, because I'm just not in a situation where I'm going to get hired, to be totally honest. I'm very realistic with what I've done in music and what I'm going to do. I'm almost 60 years old. Nobody's going to hire me to go out on the road for a year-long tour making huge money. It's just the way it is. I know that, and that's fine. I'm totally okay with that. I wouldn't really want to go unless it was really high paying anyways, because I enjoy being home, So don't get these stars in your eyes that you're going to go out on tour with a big star and make lots of money. What it is if you do play with a star, if you get an option to play with a star and you're making $300 to $500 a night, you do get bragging rights. You can say that, I played with so-and-so, and it might get you more gigs down the road, Don't abuse that. There's nothing worse than name dropping all the time. Now, if you're doing a resume or something, or you're in an interview for a band, you're auditioning for a band and they want to know what you've done, that's different. But to go around saying, I played with so-and-so, I played with so-and-so, I don't know, man. It's just not my scene. I don't think it's cool. I don't really drop names too much. I'll talk about people that I've played with that have played with famous people. Like, I used to play in a band with a guy that played with Megadeth. I used to play in a band with a guy that played with Santana. When Santana would go to Russia, my friend Tim, bass player, Tim would sub in for the bass player because he couldn't get into Russia. Santana's bass player, for whatever reason, could not tour in Russia. Tim would be the fill-in for the entire Russian portion of Santana's tour. And then when Santana was out of Russian, the original bass player or whoever they hired would rejoin. So, I don't mind talking about those guys because they're really awesome, but I'm not really interested in, name dropping too much. So anyways, guys, thanks very much. I hope that I've enlightened you a little bit about the touring scene. And I'm going to be doing a live stream soon. I think maybe tomorrow I might do a live stream sometime in the afternoon, so look for that. Thanks for commenting, subscribe, and hit that like button. And as always, keep drumming. See ya.